So thanks all for coming this evening when you could have spent the evening in your garden having a nice glass of wine, beer, cup of tea, maybe enjoying the sunset. But thank you so much for coming this evening. Let's get the essential stuff out of the way. First of all, so if the fire alarm goes off, please use one of the fire exits. There's one here, one through the left, just over there, and the main entrance where you came in. If you need the toilet, it's just down the end of the corridor, just past the main entrance. And if you have a mobile phone with you, can you please either switch it off, put it in airplane mode, silent. It can be very distractive to the speaker and also to people around you. So this evening's in two halves. So in about 5 minutes' time, we'll have the first talk. Be about 40 minutes. We'll then have a 10-minute Q&A. So if you could please save your questions if you have any to the Q&A session. Should take us through to about 8 o'clock, half-hour tea break, and then the second talk will start at 8:30, about 40 minutes, 10-minute Q&A, should be done by about 9:30. So I first came across Ivor Cummins, must have been about 2021, sort of halfway during the peak of the nonsense. And it was very much, I really resonated with his stuff about cholesterol. And he was very much looking at data and analyzing it. And it resonated with me because back in 2013, I applied for a critical illness policy. Works a bit like a life policy. So if you get, let's say, stage 4 cancer, stroke, heart attack, multiple sclerosis, or a number of other critical illnesses, it pays out a lump sum, a bit like life insurance. But the insurer wanted me to take some tests just to see if there were any underlying health issues, because if there were, they'd want to increase the premium to cover the increased risk. And I had to go to Bournemouth Hospital for the tests. It tested for all sorts of things. It tested for glucose level, white blood cell count, liver function, blood pressure, heart rate, all sorts. And I had to go and get the results from the GP. So off I trotted to the GP. And the GP said, well, Mr. Dibden, your results are all excellent, but your cholesterol level is rather high. It was 9.6. Now, I knew nothing about cholesterol. Why would I need to? And the doctor said to me, right, okay, it's a bit high. How do you want to manage this? Do you want to manage it by a diet or by medication? So I just said to her, diet. And I then left the surgery, ordered a couple of books about cholesterol, and realized the whole hypothesis was a complete fraud. The key thesis is that there's data that was assessed in the 1950s. Dr. Ansel Keys was involved, and the 22 countries that were looked at was to see whether there was any correlation between high level of cholesterol and high level of heart disease. So they picked 8 countries that had high level of cholesterol and high heart disease. They ignored the 7 countries that had no correlation, and they ignored the 7 countries like Japan that had high cholesterol, low heart disease. So clearly that's a bit of fraud, and I thought, that's not very good, is it? So 3 months later, I had to go back to the GP to get another cholesterol test. And goes in there and she says, well, Mr. Dibden, it's lower, it's 7.9 now, but have you given any more thought to having medication? So I said, well, I have. When I left the surgery 3 months ago, we ordered a couple of books. I told her about the Dr. Ansel Keys in 22 countries, that it was clearly a fraud. And she said to me, wow, you've clearly done your homework. And then what she said to me next still staggers me to this day. She said, with my doctor's hat on, given your cholesterol level, I should prescribe you statins. With my doctor's hat off, you're completely healthy, you don't need it. Which is how honest of her to say that to me. If I'd not done my research, I've gone in there, taken a prescription, trotted off down to the pharmacy and picked up my statins. So yes, it was very much what Ivor was doing resonated with me, and then Ivor was doing all sorts of data analysis with the COVID stats, looking at critical thinking, having guests as well on his The Fat Emperor podcast, which I enjoyed listening to. And then when Karen said, oh, Ivor's coming over from Ireland, would you like, maybe it's a good idea for him to come to the forest. So I said, when can he come here? Obviously tonight. And I said to Karen, what will the talks be about? And the second talk, which will be after the break, it's entitled How to Navigate the Fourth Turning, What are the key pillars of achieving mental strength and resilience, and how do we respond to the immense challenges we face in this once-in-a-century geopolitical event. But before that, before the break, the first talk is what's actually happening in the world and who's really in charge and what do they want to achieve at our expense. Can you please give a big New Forest welcome to this evening's special guest, Ivor Cummins.
Thank you. Okay, well, it's great to be here, guys. I love coming to the UK. I was born in London, though I am Irish. But I'd have to say thanks to Karen and all the organisers here, this fantastic community, and a special thanks to Bob. I turned up yesterday after my show in the attic around 6 p.m. Bob wasn't really expecting me, and he looked after me, beer, pizzas, brought me lunch today, and it's like the best bed and breakfast, the best host ever. So, Bob, how about that? So, I'm going to have to move pretty fast with this one because there's a lot of content. And this is the first 15 minutes is a talk that usually takes an hour. So I'm going to move very fast, but we can send you a link later to the full in-depth talk. But it's very important, I think, to understand the genesis of how we got here with COVID and all the other madness that you've seen. And it goes back primarily to the 50s, to the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. But just interestingly, Mussolini got the definition of fascism right. It's the collusion of corporate and state power. So the irony is stakeholder capitalism, the World Economic Forum, the way our world is being run at the moment with the UN and the unelected, EU Commission, it actually is fascism, essentially. It's the collusion of corporate and state. And of course, to fascists and to these guys, they're only interested in the state and power and managing people. They're not interested in anything spiritual. Now, I kind of avoid getting into the top of the pyramid of evil, but ultimately the top are the banking, the money lending, banking, great families behind the scenes, and the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank of the world. So we won't really get into that, but I have to acknowledge banking's at the very top. But we'll focus more on the layer that we would have recognizable names and organizations. I think it's more useful. That was an English gentleman, Ian, by the way. I forget his second name, but he drafted that diagram. It's very good. Now, I drafted this diagram, and it got me brought to Florida and also Argentina, Buenos Aires, by different groups, because I just drew it in half an hour. It's from engineering complex problem solving. You do root cause diagrams to make a very complex web simple. And this one, it occurred to me, I must put together a root cause diagram showing how the globalist utopia that they want, there's a lot of strategies that are leading towards it. But most people would never believe or understand that all these different crazy things are all part of one program, but they are. And the key thing from this, whether it's anti-meat propaganda, mass migration as a weapon, war on farmers, obviously COVID, climate, don't start me, and CBDCs, they all have lots of goals, but one common goal of all these different projects within the program is to weaken society, okay? And there's a very good reason for that, because you can't bring in a world government unless you break down the nationalism, the culture, and the traditions of the individual countries. And this has been known for centuries. This is an old strategy, just in case anyone says it's a conspiracy theory, Dr. Jakob Nordengard, great man. I went to him a few times in Sweden and interviewed him, and his book, Rockefeller Controlling the Game, I'd highly recommend. PhD he did in 2012, and it lays out the story I'm going to start with today. Quite astonishing story. Really quickly, Rockefeller Special Studies Project, you'll recognize Kissinger, and Nelson Rockefeller was vice president. They set up this Special Studies Project in the 50s. And it was pretty serious because they said that it was their destiny, right? And remember, these guys are not just the wealthiest family in America. They're up to their neck in intelligence agencies, government, They're not just a wealthy family, but they reckon history had imposed on them to create a new world order in all its dimensions: spiritual, economic, political, and social. So it's not just about money and simple power. They really believe they are there to rule the world and manage all of us in a very structured manner with a world government. They believe it. They don't even realize that they're evil, perhaps. So, really quickly, that kicked off a lot of stuff. Big deal is the Council for Foreign Relations, set up by the Rockefellers, and that brought in all the presidents of the US over time and presidents of other countries and top leaders and influencers. So the only way you pull off world government, and to be quite honest, pull off something like COVID, is by having the key opinion leaders and powerful people all together, planning and managing and agreeing. They identified back in the 50s, would you believe, climate change and global warming as an opportunity. In other words, the fear of climate change, which they would go on to create, would be a real opportunity to have all the people ask them for a solution. And that's what happened, the IPCC. They identified global health, and they were banging on about pandemics, even back in the 50s and 60s, because they knew a worldwide global pandemic, that would be an opportunity for us to come in and manage it. So this is how they work. Human resources is depopulation, usually, too many people on the planet, and resources is they want control of all the oil. They don't want all the ant people using it. The Harvard International Seminar, that was in 74 as well, I think. David Rockefeller, the big boy, 5 Rockefeller sons, all in this. And Kissinger, they set this up and brought in all the leaders from around the world to the Harvard Seminar. It was funded by Ford Foundation, big money, Rockefeller Foundation, huge money. But it came out afterwards, also the CIA funded it, and they were heavily involved. So remember, these are not just rich families and bankers. They're all engaged with intelligence and the future of America, which would be, of course, to dominate American hegemony. So it's a huge deal. This guy, Klaus Schwab, you might know from the World Economic Forum. There he is when he's young, son of a Nazi, right? Very hard to find his history. But in 71, Kissinger recognized and said, we can use this sociopath. And they did. So they got him to set up the European Management Forum, which was to bring together all the corporates and wealthy corporate structures into a group. And they had a many decades plan for how this would work. Became the World Economic Forum in, I think, 84. And Bilderberg, you see there, that's like the World Economic Forum, but only for the very top people, right? We'll talk more about that in a while. So Council for Foreign Relations will come up at the end of this talk in my last sequence, and Bilderberg also will come up, so watch out for them. Really quickly, World Economic Forum, their funding partners are all of the huge corporates are funding them, right? And that is only a selection of the top funders there, but you can read them, Bill and Melinda, of course. But there's around 300 corporates funding. The banks are the top of their board of trustees, like I mentioned earlier, including the Bank for International Settlements and the Russian Sberbank. Yeah. This transcends other quibbles. There, look at them. Just look at them. I won't read out names here, but you know the type of people these are. These are bad, bad people. This guy that will come up again towards the end. So remember Mark Carney. He's a particularly odious fish. The Larry Fink, of course, and Rubenstein, the big mega bankers, they're the key trustees, and they say that really we have to manage the material universe on behalf of all these little people. So this is the kind they are. Okay, really quickly, back to 72 anyway, we pick it up there. We got Morris Strong, he's a Rockefeller henchman, big man, became a billionaire. Eventually, later in the 2000s, he was caught with fraud in the UN. Billions went missing, and he had to run away to China, and the Chinese looked after him. So it's always the same, right? But they set up the Club of Rome in 71, I think, and that's kind of like a super rich elites propaganda for climate change club, and they fund propaganda and work with all the media. and talk about that the whole world is going to implode because of population. But The Limits to Growth is the book they put out. A lot of universities were reading it. They used a program in one of the early computers to work out that if we kept having the population that we had, basically the planet would explode. And it was complete nonsense. But Limits to Growth became famous. And a lot of students, professors read it and believed it. It was good propaganda, okay? Here's something they said in 91 in one of their big books. In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, meaning the rich guys, we came up with the idea that the threat of global warming would fit the bill. They actually said that, right? They let these things slip. They all know that climate change is nonsense. Unfortunately, we, who have been propagandized, often believe it's real. But they made it up with not a scientist in the room. The real enemy, they said in the end, is humanity itself. So they picked their enemy, and unfortunately it's us. But incredible gaslighting, that they make up nonsense, say there's going to be a crisis, when really there'll only be the weather. And then they say, you're the problem, and we're going to fix it by doing things to you. So anyway, you know the story. Really quickly, Davos is the WF manifesto. It's pretty horrific reading. Here's Trilateral Commission, very powerful group. All the top powerful people in the world are in Trilateral, unless you're not really as powerful as you think. Gardner is the chief counsel. He's a Rockefeller henchman. He wrote in Foreign Affairs, their magazine, in 1973, the hard road to New World Order. So they're all about New World Order, and they'll make up any nonsense. I'm going to skip this one, but basically they had a big program with the World Future Society to look at crises and opportunities. It's the same thing. They're looking, what crisis can we fabricate or manufacture, maybe by starting a war or just making stuff up, like the climate thing with modeling, like Neil Ferguson. What stuff can we have that people can be made scared and we'll have to come in and fix it for them? Yeah. Look at this goon, right? A bit fatter there and older. That's 72, I think. Yeah, front page paper. We have 10 years to stop the catastrophe of warming. So 10 years went by, 10 more years, 10 more years, 10 more years, 10 more years. We're on the 6th 10 years now, and we still just have the weather, like we always had, you know? So the arrogance is astonishing, but I'm sure you all know people who actually think it's real after 50 years of funded propaganda and bad science. So really quickly, Statoil, big oil money, Brundtland Commission, Harlem Brundtland, it's always money, Petro-Canada for this guy, Club of Rome, Trilateral Commission. They started our common future. And that resulted in Agenda 21. Rio de Janeiro in 1991, all of our leaders actually went to Rio de Janeiro, I think 153 countries. And they filled them with champagne and caviar. And yes, they signed off on Agenda 21, our leaders. It's because obviously our leaders don't have a clue. They probably believe in climate change, but they signed it. And in our hands was the slogan. In whose hands? Well, these guys' hands, you know. Our Charter Commission, Prince Bernhard, he set up Bilderberg Group, right? The super top bad guys group. Fair enough. They brought in Gorby and a few others, and the new generation of Rockefellers were taking over because it's a multi-generational plan to rule, okay? A great transition, they showed a broken planet in their graphics, and they said, we're going to fix the planet. But the only things broken in the planet were the things caused by their proxy wars, their pollution, and their greed, really, you know? But it's opposites day. Look at these guys, young global leaders. Here's a bunch of them. There's your fella, Tony Blair. He's a bad man. Gordon Brown, but a lot of them here, of course, during COVID, Ardern in New Zealand, Macron in France, they turned their countries into slave camps, you know? So the really bad leaders in COVID, Austria was shocking, Sebastian Kurz. The really bad countries had young global leaders. How many 1993 to present of leaders have they brought through their indoctrination program? Roughly how many do you think? A few hundred? 4,000. Yeah, 4,000. Now, a lot of those leaders didn't go on to be big leaders, but you know, they did 4,000, so they get 20 or 30 or 40 that would be in the top positions. So in 2005, they did an initiative with all of these leaders, and they told them, and it was called the 2020 Initiative. And they said in 2020, there's probably going to be problems like maybe pandemics. There'd definitely be misinformation, and people might be unhappy with stuff. Yeah. So all the leaders were brought together, the future leaders of the countries, and they worked through tabletop exercises about how they'd all work together in 2020 if there were issues. So when people wonder, how the hell did they all do the same thing? Well, 15 years before they were trained to, okay? And Global Risk Report at the same time, Military Industrial, Rand Complex, basically saying the same thing to World Economic Forum, big reports, risk of pandemics. There was no reason to say there'd be pandemics, zero. And there wasn't going to be, but they said it, and they were banging on and on about misinformation in the public, which means we're going to need to censor people who are telling the truth, okay? Super fast again, because I have a bunch more stuff I want to go through. We're going to skip that. We'll skip that. We'll skip this. Yeah, the financial crash, they jumped on that problem, and they put together 1,500 experts and 70 global councils and said, we're going to need to remake the whole world governance structure because look at that financial crash that we caused. Oh, well, someone's going to have to help fix that. You know, they fix what they cause. Yeah. Kissinger in the New York Times, 2009. You'll get called a conspiracy theorist for using the phrase New World Order. And I've shown you, they made it up and they keep using it. Kissinger in the New York Times, the chance for a New World Order, 2009. G20 in 2009 as well. G7 became G20 and they started bringing in control over all countries' leaders because obviously they had plans. And they even got together 14,000 big internet influencers under the age of 30, the WEF Global Shapers, because they knew when they were going to pull off their scam, you might have a problem if a lot of young influencers questioned it. So they looked after that. Clever, clever. I won't mention Rockefeller's lockstep. Public-private partnership then, 2015, that is fascism, that is the collusion of corporate and state, right in our faces. The global goals 2015, Agenda 2030. Now they're putting in control of the lands, the fishes, the sea, everything, right? And that's what they want, but they won't get it, but that's what they want. Industrial revolution, it's all about transhumanism, altering the human, and space technology and space surveillance and digital IDs, blah, 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 because they love that stuff, okay? And they do publish it. This is very important in 19. WF and UN, that both sprang from Rockefeller's loins. So you'd say, well, they're the same thing in ways. But they officially joined up for the WEF to get all the corporate money to fund the UN's 2030 agenda, you know. And the stuff they're talking about is all lies, basically. I mean, gender equality, they couldn't care less. That's about pushing trans stuff and ideologies and just generally breaking down society structures. Health is obviously pandemics and vaccines. Climate change doesn't need a comment, it's nonsense. And digital cooperation is digital IDs, blah, blah, blah. And this, Northern Guard says, is what they'd like. For the World Economic Forum, G20 and the UN to be the ultimate kind of manager of the planet, or certainly the West in the Earth. And then the regions are underneath, and then the countries, blah, 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 blah. But again, they won't get it. Final thing on this sequence, 2019, September, good timing, they announced the Decade of Action. And within a few months, we saw some action. Yeah, pretty crazy action. So again, last reminder, I've talked around these recognizable structures and what is fully published, everything I told you. But just keep in mind at the very top behind the curtain, ultimately are the banks. And yeah, I won't go through that again. On top of what I had in my diagram, though, there is war. They love war. I mean, they salivate over wars. Doesn't matter who it is or who's getting killed. They make money on one side, they make money on the other side, and they divide all the population because everyone's got one side or another they favor. So they divide the population and the masses, as well as cleaning up and gaining power. So all these guys I talked about love war. I just want to mention that. And all the stuff I have in my root cause diagram, all the strategies they're doing, they're all BS because they haven't got any real problems, so they make them up. So it's good that all of their strategies and scams are BS. I know a lot of people believe them in many cases, but it's good that they don't have real issues to capitalize on or exploit. It's kind of reassuring that they have to make nonsense up, and it means it's easier to attack them. What we need to do is create, maintain, and sustain a counter narrative to all of their lies. And it's a long game because they've played the long game. So for us to counter it, it has to be a long game because they're long gamers. You can't just suddenly rise up and fix things. It's going to be a long process. Now, I'm going to switch to the Far East or Middle East because I wanted to bring it up to date and also address the war thing. So I did a few days' work to pull together the history of Iran and put things in context. But this guy, Nordengard, sent me in 40 minutes, had done all the work. It was too late. I'd already done it. But one extra thing he had was 6 months ago, he was scanning and watching all media, and he picked up that there was a load of drum beating for war in Iran 6 months ago, long before Israel did anything. Interesting. There was articles like this, and this lady's a kind of Zionist lady who gave a huge amount of money to this guy. And she was saying, yeah, that basically Trump was working on a plan to topple Iranian government and Iranian plot to kill Trump. And, you know, a hit list from Iran of former Trump aides. Like, that's kind of stupid. It is stupid. But they were beginning to seed, the media were beginning to kind of let little bits out. Right, so that was interesting. But I'm seeing now that everything is being used to divide us. Obviously in COVID, there was mask, not mask, vaccine. But the war is also massively dividing us. And I even had some really good people in the COVID movement, really good people, who when I shared some stuff around this, kind of jumped in and attacked me. Like, oh, are you justifying the Iranian blah, blah, blah? And I said, no. Are you saying that because of that thing, we have the right to bomb the crap out of them? Person wouldn't say anything. So the division is being used to cause division, just like Ukraine and just like masks. It's very sinister. So this guy in 1951 was the democratic, essentially, leader in Iran, Razmara, and he had to be assassinated by the MI6 CIA because he was interfering with the British oil companies that were basically taking all of Iran's oil and giving them nothing. He began to cause trouble about it, so he got the bullet. And this fellow was replaced him, Mohammad Mossadegh, but by around a year or two later, around 52, he began to get populist in Iran and say, no, we want some of that money. So he got taken out, not killed, this guy. They forced him to be overthrown in a coup. And this is all documented. So the point is here, we have our fingerprints, not we. We, the West, have our fingerprints all over the problems that Iran has had. But then we turn around and tell everyone we're bombing the crap out of them because of the problems they have, which we caused. It's an important thing, and people don't seem to understand this. It's astonishing. So the Shah came in anyway, and then CIA and Mossad, on the record, helped him form the secret police, who began to shoot people and beat people up and do lots of nasty stuff over the next decade or two. And the reason they did all that was because the Shah needed to keep power, but a lot of the people, religious and all, didn't like this Shah, who was completely kind of European. He was educated in Switzerland, and he was doing all this stuff. And some of the clerics who were making a lot of money through land deals, he was changing all of that. So there's a lot of people who would have tried to take him over. So ruthlessness was used. Now, funny enough, with all that ruthlessness, which is shocking, at the end of the day, they did end up with a European-style booming Iran in the 70s. Looks a bit different than now, doesn't it? So this was kind of good, and the violence was probably tapering. So you could say, okay, it's not the end of the world. But Khomeini was rising because he was over in France and in Iraq, and he was thrown out of the country, but the West supported him, you know, and he was kept going, and he was putting propaganda out, and he was trying to say, we need to get religion back into Iran. and he was getting more and more support. So that was a challenge. That was a challenge. But the real problem was then that the Shah in 73 began to get ideas. He began to push back on the West and said, I'm not a puppet. And he began to do nuclear plants because at that time they thought the oil could run out. So he was thinking ahead. And he was supplied by France and the West with technology. There's no weapons, building nuclear plants back in 73. But the big mistake was he threatened the West that in 1979, when the contract ran out with the Western oil oligarchs, he was going to not renew it. They were going to renegotiate. And that basically was the end of him, I would suggest. And then Carter jumped in 78. And remember we said Council Foreign Relations earlier, very important, Rockefeller, powerful organization. Carter was in with the Council of Foreign Relations and they were telling him, you got to tell the Shah to back off on all the oppression and release all his political opponents. Now the Shah said, I can't do that. Like, obviously, Mr. Religion's going to come in. And Carter said, you're going to do it. And he forced him to do it. And of course, as soon as the Shah was forced by America to just back off, things began to get ugly pretty quick, as you can imagine. So again, the West kind of owns this current regime too. Interesting, yeah. It was published pretty much at the time, America's Secret Engagement with Khomeini. He was living in luxury in France. When they got the Shah toppled over, he was flown by military jets from France into Iran with fighter escorts to make sure no one killed him. So we chaperoned him back here. That kind of left a mark in Iran, didn't it? Yes, it did. It kind of changed things for women, particularly. The Shah's wife said to him, or in an interview, this guy is actually very Zionist, but he had a good article here in Blaze. Pahlavi, the wife of the former Shah, told him during an interview in her home, my husband said to me that if Jimmy Carter keeps this up, what I told you, ultimately Khomeini will come back and with him will come an Islamic revolution. The Russians will invade Afghanistan, Iraq will go to war against Iran, and who knows what horror will come upon the world. Well, the horror that the West likes, because you can game horror and you can divide people with horror and you can make a lot of money and get a lot of power and control with horror. Sadly, I know it sounds terrible, but this is it. Giscard d'Estaing in 79 met with Carter and a bunch of other leaders from Europe, and he basically said that Carter said, we're going to put in Khomeini. And he realized the US was trading its strongest pro-Western Persian Gulf ally in favor of a terrorist Muslim cleric. So d'Estaing just couldn't understand what was happening, but he didn't understand the big picture, because the US knows they can put that guy in, and then in the future, at an opportune time, they can focus us all and say he's a tyrant, and then they can do it all again and flip him. And basically the flipping will happen. I'll show you in a moment. There's 1983. I think that was BBC. Britain helped Iran's Islamic regime destroy their opposition. This stuff was reported. US gave aid to Iraq because as soon as Khomeini came in, Iraq declared war on Iran exactly as they knew would happen, and the US began to fund Iraq. It's shocking. Look, what was this? Yeah, this is mainstream way back then. CIA files prove America helped Saddam as he gassed Iran. Remember all that stuff about gassing? It was getting funded and supported by the Yanks and probably MI6. And this one was hilarious. I didn't know that Saddam was part of a 6-man squad, assassination squad, to kill a diplomat in Iraq, run by the CIA. He was the CIA's man in 1959. So, look, need I say more? The West owns all of this mess, and they're telling us that they're here to fix the mess. And it's BS. I'm going to jump 25 years, of course. Saddam did the same as the Shah. He got bigger than his boots, began to tell the US, I'm not a stooge, and began to want to be the leader. And that's what you get if you go against the West, ultimately. And now the Shah's son, who has been looked after in the West for the last 20 years, this is the Times YouTube video. I took a freeze frame, and basically the West is setting him up to be the next leader. Now we'll see what happens. But you can just see what a gargantuan scam it is. And I'll show you what's in this report in a minute. So anyway, the reason I told you all of that is the irony now that we have good COVID people fighting with me because I'm kind of referring to this. And they are programmed to believe that Iran is terrible for women and they've got some kind of a magic nuclear bomb, which is absurd. And they're going to fight with me about it. And it's not about me. Imagine divided over something that's so clearly as I described to you, and yet it's being used to divide us. Why now? Is it weapons of mass destruction? Right? Pull the other one. We went through this nonsense before in 2003, right? And we know since 2003, after the 9/11 and other stuff and the Iraq war, Iran did stop developing nuclear weapons. Don't mind your 60% enrichment. You try and take that to a deliverable ballistic missile. I mean, you ask a nuclear engineer, forget about it. So we could just watch them and make sure they didn't truly go further. But we're not. We go in and bomb the hell out of them right now. So why now? It's not this. I mean, yeah, that guy for 30 years has been saying they're 10 minutes away from a bomb. For 30, a complete nonsense. But again, he has his own agenda, clearly. Is it women's rights? The argument I got in with the COVID person, right? Well, no, this is what I shared and why a couple of people came after me, right? All I shared was that Tehran now, and in the last few years, is very much dropping all of the hijab stuff. So this is the last time we should be bombing them because they're actually themselves moving away from that. So we should be standing back. But no, we're using this propaganda to justify bombing them right when they're several years into backing off that stuff. Do you see the irony? It's crazy. So it's not women's rights, obviously. The people, this is kind of what it is. It's the Belt and Road. So the BRICS are rising, China, Russia, and a load more countries. They're pretty much built the Belt and Road transport of massive goods, twice the goods of the existing channels in half the time. And that is a massive threat to the West. So our intel agencies and MI6 and CIA are all working together saying, how do we mess up this trade line? And you'll see there what's right in the middle of it. Turn Tehran into a mess. Tehran's currently working, supplying a ton of China's oil. They're all on board, so smash them. This guy, Monero Money, is very good. I happened to see his tweet. I don't like getting into the Rothschild kind of stuff, but he's right. Iran has no Rothschild central bank, nearly the last country in the world to not have one. No IMF loans, Regis deepest oil reserves, supplies a ton of China's crude, controls the Strait of Hormuz, which is huge, and trades outside the US dollar, which is not allowed. That's why they want it broken. And that's all it is. And of course, Netanyahu has his own stuff going on. And they told us in 2003, Wesley Clark, the famed kind of general, I think he was NATO, wasn't he? He ran an Iraq operation. Anyway, big guy. He came out and says, yeah, the plans are to attack and topple 7 Muslim states. And Syria was the 6th of the 7, and Iran is the last. And they told us. There's nothing to do with women's rights. I'll tell you that. So the means, this report I showed you earlier, it's just funny to watch. This Saban Center, very close to the government, and this is basically what the thinking was in 2009, the trouble with Tehran. And it's all about how you disarm or take it over. Invasion, airstrikes, leave it to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli strike. It's like they tell you well in advance. And then there's the color revolutions. Sure, 2014 Ukraine, they flipped the country. That's why we had the 2022 war, because the West flipped Ukraine, and then eventually NATO pushed so hard. At some point, you're going to have trouble. So color revolutions. And here they are talking all about how they do a color revolution or flip the military. This is the West. And a really comical thing, shocking, I mean, it's gallows humor. Containment would be obviously what you do with Iran if you're a bit worried about them. You just work with them and it'd be containment. But this report, that would be accepting the unacceptable, because they know we're not going to contain it. We want to smash it. So that's the way it works. Now, Bilderberg, I'm going to finish with 2024, they're meeting. This is the top of these kind of sociopaths. War, AI, and more war. the 2024 Bilderberg agenda. They are salivating for war because of the money and the use of AI and the power it gives them and toppling regimes. It's just, they are disgusting. They really are. And this blog just the other day from the great Dr. Jakob Nordengard, he goes through their 2025 plans. They're in Stockholm. And he jokes about them being like witches at black masses, which they kind of are. And they're all talking about AI-powered war machine. And then, of course, we had the attack. Who's hosting the event? Of course, mega bankers. Always the bankers, the Wallenberg family. They're in weapons and banking. Huge. And we have, of course, Peter Thiel. You might be familiar with the AI guy and Trump's guy. I didn't know. In 2007, he was a recent young global leader. And he attended his first Bilderberg, which is the next level up, right? A meeting. A year later, he started to fund the American Friends of Bilderberg, together with elders like David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, the warmonger, and current chair. And since 2012, he has served as director in Bilderberg's inner sanctum with a capacity to choose guests and set the agenda. So Thiel's done good. He's right up at the top. And the inner core is getting dominated now by big tech moguls. So if you're kind of wondering, well, big tech versus the old families versus CIA and the Rockefellers, they all tend to merge together. Whether they're frenemies or alliances, there's only one core of power in the West, and this is it. So you get drawn to it if you're big and you have big ideas, and if you have zero conscience, no ethics, right? And you don't care about truth. So I'm going to fly through this to get to the good bit. Again, Microsoft's research and strategy officer, Demis Hassabis from Google DeepMind. These are huge names, and they're all in there. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, you know, and he got a whole bunch of US Army commanders. So it's all the usual suspects. This was their agenda. I won't go through it, but depopulation and migration is in there, as you'd expect. Proliferation. They want to proliferate arms in Europe. And you know, all of Europe has been asked to spend a ton of money on arms because Putin's coming or something. And geopolitics, energy and critical minerals. They need the minerals and energy for the huge electrical needs and for the AI monster they want to try and build. So that's become important. And defense, of course, yada, yada, all security and war. And is there anything in here? Oh, Oscar Stenstrom, a former Secretary of State of Sweden, where they're doing this, and he managed to help get Sweden into NATO, which is another key thing that happened a while back. Not everyone noticed it. And now is employed by the big bankers, the Wallenbergs, right? So straight from politics in with the big boys. And he was in charge of this meeting about Sweden and weapons. A few days later, Swedish government presented a defense agreement, supported by everyone, of course, all the yes men, like in Agenda 21, they all sign off, added 300 billion euro to the budget of the armed forces by, of course, taking loans. And will I say any more? Yeah, they really are disgusting because they laugh at us. Anyone with intellect, anyway. We know to a certainty, and all my geopolitical and hedge fund people in Maverick Org and groups I'm in worldwide, super smart people, incredible knowledge in geopolitics, they all laugh openly at the idea that Putin would move into Europe. It's so absurd, guys, if you don't know all the stuff. It's a farce. And what did this senior person, the foreign minister, say? Gaslighting us. It's about our children and grandchildren not having to learn to speak Russian. That is laughing at us. And sadly, there's many normal people who know nothing who will think, oh, God, the Russians are coming. You know, this is how they do it. This is how they do it. Mark Carney, I told you, come up again. The guy is destroying Canada as we speak. WEF trustee at the highest level, and he's hosting this super banker meeting, and he's up to his neck in Bilderberg. And of course, they're all talking about securing critical minerals, supply chains, AI, war, and that means there'll be more proxy wars, more countries flipped, more resources of other people stolen because our guys are on the rampage. You know, why is this important? Without understanding history and origins, like we just went through, we're cattle. They all understand the history. They know all the stuff. We have to know it too, so we can have conversations and we're informed. Without understanding mass formation, I'd say, how all our friends and neighbors go insane based on propaganda, we end up being disempowered like cattle. We need to understand psychology too. That's the second talk. And the oligarchies I referred to have two primary synergistic strategies. The first one is obvious. They want global power, control, and money. That's as old as humanity. But the second one is they want to divide the masses. It's extremely important. And I think that's the one that we need to be cognizant of and find ways to help people understand what's happening without being divided, and maybe choosing not to engage in a conversation that can get very strident and cause division, and maybe back off. You know, we need to convert cleverly. This joke I loved because this is a Wall Street guy. Do you remember Occupy Wall Street? It was a very interesting time. At the time we were watching it in my corporate, the managers, it was fascinating that the people had actually now finally realized who was causing all the trouble. It was the banking. And they went after them. And they got scared. But then they pulled a nasty trick, oldest trick in the book. And you can see this joke. The Wall Street guys, the bankers just say, just fund them and introduce them to identity politics. And that's what happened. So the NGOs and all these groups, they just poured money at them and said, hey, we want to help you. And when the money came in, bad people within the groups rose, and then they refocused onto gay or lesbian or whatever. Just give them anything. Just give them something, give them money, and they just go away. It's sad, but that's how they do it. So I think this activism and all and fighting with politicians, I'm not so sure is going to get us what we want. And that's it, the latter goal. So the good news in general, COVID, they didn't get what they wanted, which was universal vaccination and digital ID. They failed. But all of the madness they put in us did create a very large awakening, which is a big problem for them, hence the censorship. So it's all on the razor's edge now. They made a stab, they overplayed their hand, they didn't quite get there, and the people have been awakened, lots of people. So now the game is really on, I would say. It sounds negative when I go through all of them and their money and power, but they can be overturned once we get enough people working together. And there's loads of groups to support who are doing good work. Now, I used to show this slide, my way of pushing back, create and propagate counter narratives to all their nonsense. Like Iran now, if you know what it's about, you can say, well, you do know the CIA and MI6 basically messed up that country for the last 50 years, right? It's not about bad guys over there and we're the good guys. We did most of that. It's a powerful thing to say to people that stops them. Convert cleverly, good conversations, and we'll talk about communication in the second talk. Avoid all divide and conquer issues. Don't engage with the people who want to fight and argue and scream about gay or scream about Iran or women's rights. And I'd say you're pretty good, you guys, at not engaging in that nonsense. And live the counter narrative. Now, that's the key. Use cash, buy local, create local teams, network together, create real world, real people groups all over the place. Yours is here, fantastic. Create them everywhere and have them link in with each other and cross-pollinate. That is the way forward, okay? This video, I want you to watch. We'll send a link afterwards, maybe. I loved it back in 21, Academy of Ideas. They're brilliant, and it's so good. But I took some slides for it from the end. How can totalitarianism be prevented? If it's induced in the early stages of mass psychosis, where we are, can the effects be reversed? Well, yes, every person is important. Every single human who disengages from the nonsense. I mean, Solzhenitsyn says it. The only thing that's required of any person is to not partake in the lie. And Solzhenitsyn knew the power of individuals saying, no, that's nonsense. I'm not partaking. I've got my own people here. I'm not playing that nonsense. The power of that as the numbers grow is huge because it gives other people motivation to perhaps do so as well. So that's huge. Yeah, I won't read this, but Carl Jung said it. Collective psychosis, totalitarianism, the person who regains their soul is the beacon of hope for others. And if you get enough numbers, it begins to grow like it did in all of history. Truth they hate, truth is crucial. The more people speaking the truth, the more these guys have a problem, as you well know. Hence the censorship they're really pushing that. Humor, it's another funny point, if you pardon the pun, but the use of humor and ridiculing these people, they don't have any humor because they're kind of sociopaths. They find it unnerving when people are laughing at them in any numbers at all, and it's much harder to censor pushback that's couched in humor and taking the mickey, if you will. So that's a powerful thing. And Václav Havel, and I know I'm over time, parallel structures. So he became president of Czechoslovakia, and he lived through the totalitarianism, and he noticed that parallel structures springing up, people working together, knowing about the problem and not engaging, was more powerful than even political lobbying in their history of their country. The bad guys really worry about groups springing up everywhere of people who won't engage in their nonsense. They really need everyone to engage in their nonsense. And ultimately, if you get enough numbers doing this all over the place and beginning to coalesce, here and there, ultimately the bad guys are kind of pushed back into their slime. So that is the hope. I'm not saying it's easy. I know it's very tough. I won't read that, but it basically says what I just said, essentially. And ultimately, if we can grow it enough, you end up with a whole alternative world of sorts, and they're left with their disgusting lies-based nonsense. And really, that's how you beat them. Oh, there's the Eye of Sauron. I love it. Good old Tolkien. But that's essentially it. And, in the second talk, we'll talk about mental strength, resilience, and communication with people, and completely different topics, so no more negative stuff. But hopefully people resonate with that. I don't have all the answers. Oh, that was the last one. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us that the harder the conflict, and this one is hard, the more glorious the triumph. And that's the way I live my life, and it's the way you have to live. It's the only way. It's all to play for in this fourth turning. Thank you. Thank you. Q&A, and then maybe 5 or 10 minutes just to clarify any stuff or strong opinions, and then you deserve a break more than I do. Hello, sir.
Hi. Thank you, those things. But where does China fit in this? Because you talk about the West, you talked about the Silk Road, but the Bank of China was at the top level with all the bankers. There was the Bank of China. So
yes.
How does that square?
The reason I leave out China, and funny enough, I'm glad you asked that, is we have enough to deal with our own sphere. China is like, and I talked a lot with worldwide folks of extraordinary knowledge, and they also talk very little of China. Not because it's not important, not because it won't do stuff that's quite nasty and undermine us, but China is just peripheral with our major problem. So China, certainly in COVID, some people said, oh, China caused COVID because they had the falling man, and they did all these tens of thousands of tweets, and they did. But all my guys are agreed, China are like frenemies to these oligarchs. They work with them at the high level. China's got their own ant farm, and they want their ant farm to run well, and they want to work with Russia, and they don't want to work so much with the West. But they're not going to start a bun fight with the West, and they will occasionally do favors for the top dogs in the West. So I think really, at the start of COVID, the falling man and the welded doors and all the nonsense that came from China, that was them kind of doing a solid or a favor for our big boys who needed to run a COVID scam. So they're important, but our main problem is what we're dealing with, who's pumping propaganda at us. It's our own Western guys.
But if they screw up Iraq and that blocks their Silk Road, I mean, are they going to be mightily irritated that that's
They will, but again, it gets a bit complex because China will be very careful because they hold massive amounts of US debt. They need the US moronic consumer market, sorry guys in the US, for their output, and they have their own financial and debt issues in China. So it's very delicately balanced. And the other thing is, they sent a few planes into Iran the other day, and apparently they don't know what's on them. Everyone is waiting to see where it goes, including the Chinese and Xi Jinping. They're watching. Now, America has got everyone in the West believing the nonsense about why there's currently a war against Iraq. And China is not going to come out and start saying against their frenemies America, hey, you're all XYZ, because that's going to start big conflict. So everyone's playing the 4D chess. And I'd say China and Russia, if Iran comes under more pressure and is at risk of falling, may engage more. And then our media will all be talking about evil Putin and evil Xi Jinping, and the game will roll on, but it's all a game, you know? So it's a good question though. China's complex, and Russia, I'll send a link maybe to all the guys later, an interview I did with Alex Craner, a hedge fund guy. I interviewed him in Dubai about Russia and the actual history of Russia in the West. 25 minutes. I think you'll like it.
Trump, good or bad?
Oh, they asked me that last night, and in Ledbury, it's a tricky one. Trump was way better than the alternative, because to be honest, the alternative a few months ago, I'm not sure America would really have elections in 4 years' time. I mean, that's insanity, what was going to happen. Trump was making a lot of good noises, seemed to be up for freedom, seemed to be a lot of good things, but one of the biggest worries all my geopolitical guys around the world have is they are really worried about the Zionist control over. So that's the biggest concern with Trump. I know people don't like the wall, people don't like this, they don't like that, but everyone's really worried that he's so under the thumb. Now, you could argue during the Iran thing, he famously dropped an F-bomb. First time a US president ever did. And I looked at him just as a manager and a psychology guy. It really looked like authentic frustration.
Yeah.
It wasn't a scam. He really was pressured, angry, annoyed. So he's getting huge heat from Netanyahu. They probably have stuff on him, a little bit of compromat, and he's probably under pressure and trying to play it down the middle. So, but in general, he's a really hard one to call.
He's better than the alternative, that's what
He's better than the alternative, but then like he's in with Teal and all, and I just showed you Teal's up to his neck in this. But maybe some of these people like Trump and Teal, they're playing along with really nasty stuff, and we go, oh no. But maybe deep down, they don't really want the madness that I went through, and they want to kind of get America first and maybe level things out a bit.
Really, they could be actors to highlight to the unwavering what's going on. You need people like that.
You kind of do.
Someone said that about Oprah. They said
Oprah, yeah.
They said, oh, she's bad, she's bad. But we then read a story because she had links to John of God. And John of God got arrested for paedophilia. But if he didn't have the links with Oprah, we wouldn't have known about John of God. So there are these stories saying that a lot of these people could be used to get the flack, but to bring out the bad people. I don't know.
Oh, to expose things that
Yeah.
are going on. Possibly, it's a really thick soup, all of that kind of thing, and who's who and whose allegiances. It really does get very complex. That's it at a high level. Trump's the tricky one. Who else is really ambiguous? Sorry, go ahead.
So why do we say it's a campaign against the West when New Zealand and Australia are being drawn in, Africa seems to be...
Oh, Australia's in the Five Eyes, New Zealand is too.
Yeah.
They're
Not
included.
just Northern Hemisphere.
Oh no. When I say, sorry, what we generally understand as the West, like Australia and New Zealand are obviously politically and are the West really. I mean, sure, America has its thumb on them.
Yeah.
They're in the Five Eyes.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I say the West, and the West would really kind of include Israel, even though obviously it's in the Middle East, but obviously Israel is completely affiliated with, Eastern Europe is where a lot of the people who went to Israel came from, and of course Israel is massively interacting with America, to the point that people say it's the United States of Israel in America. So yeah, that's what I mean when I say West.
But who's not in control?
Who's not West, I would say, and is separate with their own strategies that I'm not getting into much. China, Russia, the BRICS. Like, they've got their own thing. They're trying to get out of the dollar without getting the shit bombed out of their country, or getting their government flipped in a colour revolution. So all of the BRICS are the other side. So to keep it simple, there's kind of all of our lot, you know, including Australia and New Zealand and etc. And then there's the BRICS, are the alternative. So we go from a unipolar American hegemony driven world, which has been the case since World War II. America has been started, instigated, or secretly run over 80 wars since 1946. Iran has done none, I think, or started or instigated aggressive wars. Most countries don't do that. That's mostly it's an American thing. And now we're going to a multipolar world, and there's going to be a lot of shaky stuff going on, because BRICS versus the Western American dominated hegemony. That's multipolar. Is there another pole? Well, you could look at China and Russia as poles, but they are linking together, so you could kind of look at them as one pole, the whole BRICS, because they're kind of buddying up. But yeah, there's poles coming out.
What do you think of Farage?
I don't pay too much attention. I look very much mostly globally, geopolitically, but I do keep an eye on that stuff. Farage seemed very good, but I've repeatedly heard that people in the party who are very authentic and want to stick with what was originally talked about tend to feel they're squeezed out or they leave. And Farage, and I wish I could remember, one of my worldwide guys mentioned a rumour, but it seemed pretty solid. There was something that someone had something on Farage or whatever, that he's kind of compromised, and that's the problem. Who's not? I mean, the Russian compromat to get blackmail on someone was a huge thing, and now, I mean, Israel does it to a fine art. I mean, they've whole departments, I'd say, of Mossad for finding compromat, but everyone else is doing it too. So behind the scenes, all of these leaders, it may not be that they are truly bad, fooling us, and going to lead us down the path to the wrong conclusion. They may kind of be forced, but they're allowed to do certain things. It's weird, like RFK Jr., right? You know, MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, and he's done fantastic work on calling the vaccines and loads of other stuff. So he's great. I heard on good authority, the stuff that they have on him would make the hair stand on your end. And that can explain why RFK is doing all this good stuff, and then suddenly he comes out with weird warmongering stuff that, like you're saying, I thought RFK occasionally was getting tearful, genuinely, about all the people injured with vaccines. He's kind of crying. And then he turns around and he comes out with more warmongering stuff you wouldn't believe. But I think people tell him, hey, okay, we'll let you away with damaging our buddies in pharma, and we'll let you away with maybe hurting their business model, because these guys are operating at a way higher level than big pharma. So maybe they let him do that stuff, get credibility with everyone by pushing back against the system, and then they say, yeah, but on this issue, you got to say this. I think there's a lot of that.
Right. Is it true or false? The quantum financial system is running behind the scenes. Is it going to take out the banking system as we know it today for the good of the people?
I would not be the expert to comment on that. The hedge fund guys and all the financial guys that I've been over in Salvador and Argentina with and all, that hasn't come up. There's a lot of stuff about Bitcoin. There's a lot of stuff about the derivatives market being in an incredibly dangerous position, but the quantum banking hasn't come up much.
ISO 2022, the new ISO asset-backed banking requirements coming in, Basel 3.
Oh, Basel III and gold being raised up to the top tier along with the US dollar. Broadly familiar, but not, I've heard of that kind of aspect, haven't gone into it, and surprisingly, the financial guys in the groups I'm in, they're on signal, you know, to be more private. But there's loads of topics coming up all the time, but it's just odd. That one has not come up, or certainly hasn't come up a lot. But by all means, there could be, you're saying there could be kind of good people who are going to precipitate a collapse in a good way?
That's what I was testing, yeah, from your perspective.
I wouldn't know, and I only speak on what I'm pretty happy I know is good.
Zelensky, how do you think he'll fare with what's all going on in the world today?
Well,
because I read an article about 8 years ago saying that he wanted a war, and he wanted NATO to fight it for him, and he's destroyed Ukraine. I've got no sympathy for Zelensky or what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that?
Well, at the risk of being naughty, I'm sorry, I'll just take a moment. It shouldn't be back too far. This is very naughty, actually. I shouldn't do this. Right? I think he's probably earned that. The thing about Zelensky is, Zelensky clearly is a puppet of the West. Just another puppet of many.
If anything, I've supported Putin.
Yeah, because
the things that Putin has gone in there for a reason.
Absolutely, no. Putin was forced in there. Like, no geopolitical analyst worth their salt would argue with the fact that Putin was forced in there by NATO. The 2014 coup, they put in this dancer, erotic dancer, or whatever he is, and he's just a puppet.
In high heels.
Yeah, in high heels and I believe stockings and suspenders too. Yeah. He's like one of those members of parliament years ago, you know, who got caught. But the thing is that Zelensky, it's so obvious, and yet to the masses in the West, they actually thought he was kind of a hero. It's just so ironic. But Zelensky, they butchered their own people, killed loads of Russians. Putin, in fairness, had no choice. Now, I will say something about Putin, but you get it called, oh, you're a Putin apologist. No, I'm a realist. I'm a brutal realist. I'm an engineer, and I look at all the data, I look at the history, and I come to probabilistic, rational conclusions. Putin came in the 90s, and you might know this. I only really heard this the other week. Russia was being run by the government of the 7 bankers. And the guy, Alex Krainer, who went through this, he said the Russian, because he's Croatian, historian. The rule of the 7 bankers in the 90s, and Russia was being strip mined and raped of resources during the fall and for the year or two afterwards. Putin came in, like it or not, and he basically came in with power behind him. He's obviously a strong individual. And he got the 7 bankers basically into a room. And he said, guys, I'm not going to take what you stole. You can have what you stole. But from this day on, you're out of politics. You can do all your business, but you're out of the politics business, or else. So, 3 of them fought him through the courts, but Putin had quite a lot of control, and they lost. And they all went to Israel. So that was 3 of them. Because, the 4th one was Rothschild's man in Russia, controlling his assets. And the 4th one continued to fight, and Putin got him put in jail for 9 years for tax evasion, like they got Capone, right? And he's a Rothschild, guys. That's 4. The other 3, he didn't say what happened to them, but they basically backed off. So that's why I say the bankers are really at the top, but Putin went in, astonishingly, and toppled the bankers, which usually doesn't happen. After that, Russia at the time was $56 a month average. Half the country was in poverty. It was an absolute basket case. And like Putin or not, in the next few years, he fixed Russia, and now it's a powerful military, it's a superpower. You look at it, it's not riddled with mass migration, it's not in a mess. You can see all the footage. People will send you the videos from all the towns and cities.
It's clean.
It's clean. It's pretty tightly run. The thing about Putin is they say, well, he killed this person and that person. He has nothing on the CIA. The CIA have killed all around them for the last, like, they've 80 wars. So Putin, if you're running a country, and again, I'm not an apologist, I have no personal feelings for Putin, but he's running a country of 170 million that he took back from the bloody bankers. That was a basket case. Yes, you're going to have to be a tough leader. And if you get insurrections or people against you, yeah, some of them might even end up dying. America does that for breakfast. It kills people who are a problem. In fairness, so the whole Putin thing has been so twisted in propaganda into our ears and eyes for 20 years, because in the 90s, after he threw out the Rothschild and the other bankers, America and the West started a massive propaganda campaign against him, because he was setting a dangerous precedent. Throwing out the bankers and fixing your country. Not allowed. Not allowed. So there you are. That's some interesting stuff on terrifying Putin.
There's a nice story, if everyone wants to...
Oh, this lady here, sorry, I don't.
Right. Yeah, there was a very recent talk by Professor Sachs.
Oh, he's pretty good.
See, that's what I had my hand up for.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Sachs.
I'm surprised he hasn't been shot.
The other thing, question number 2, are you familiar with the work of Anaron Rights to help people get out of the maritime jurisdiction?
Ah, in Ledbury there was a guy, Sook, who I think you know, and I interviewed Sovereign Pete last year, and I'm broadly familiar, but it's something I decided I let it progress because I have so many fronts I'm engaged with and fighting on. It sounds complex, it sounds very interesting, and I do know a guy in Ireland who the police just leave him alone and he doesn't have tax and he drives around without. I know it's possible and I know it's really hard and I know they will kick you up and down the street when you do it, but you can win. But I don't know the details. It sounds fascinating.
It is.
Yeah. Oh no, I'd say so.
I agree with Steve, it's Jeffrey Sachs.
Oh,
he was
wow.
he was on stage with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
explained it so well,
He's
going back
good.
to 2008, I think it was. How they pushed and pushed, and it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. When people said stop, 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 eventually they did. But we only see the last couple of years.
Because they make sure you only see.
Yes.
Yes.
I would
Sachs
recommend
was in
anybody watch that.
Sachs actually was in the European Parliament.
Yes.
I remember taking the core of his talk and sharing it as hard as I could. It was superb. Superb.
Derby University.
I'm just surprised again that he didn't, I don't know, fall out of a window or commit suicide by shooting himself in the back 5 times. But he is Jewish, and he is Jewish, so he has more latitude to talk about a lot of things, maybe. It kind of covers him a bit. He can talk about Israel as well in very...
Like Douglas Murray, he's Jewish.
Yeah, Douglas, he's a mixed bag though. Sometimes he comes out with stuff and I'm thinking, what? But yeah.
Jeffrey Sachs was saying in this thing that the Russians, I mean, I don't know if the figures are correct, but 25 million of them were destroyed fighting Hitler. So,
Oh yeah. Oh God, yeah.
you know,
Who was supported by Ukraine. Ukraine were on the Nazi side. So
Yeah. Ukraine has a leftover of Nazi, you know, you've seen all they've got a tradition.
In America, the whole, what was that system called? The paperclip.
Oh yeah, they took the top Nazi people and brought them to America. Now in fairness, that sounds bad, but at this level of war and intel and operations, you do tend to do that. You take valuable assets and you say, well okay, they were really nasty people, but we don't care. We still want what they got. But you know, one of the early heads of NATO was a bona fide Nazi. I forget his name, but it was in the 70s, the head of NATO, and there's black and white photos, and he was a Nazi senior staff. But like, all of that is forgotten, you know, because it's all about the game. And these people don't care if you were a mass murderer last year. Was
his name Von Braun?
Could have been, but it's not It's open, but no one will talk about it because it's awkward, and basically the media are on. You just don't talk about that. Or maybe you get called an anti-Semite if you talk about it. Who knows these days? But there's weird stuff that happens, but it's not weird to them. Because they don't care. If you're a mass murderer last week, and now you're useful, they don't care if you killed a million people.
Well,
And I mean that. These people who run things, they literally don't care if you killed a million people. Tony Blair went into Iraq based on a total 100% fraud, right?
Yes.
Tony Blair went into Iraq based on this nonsense. And 500,000, at least, men, women and children died. And you know for a fact that Tony Blair would sleep like a baby every night. In fact, if he woke up, it would only because he'd be worried about some tactical or strategic thing. 500,000 people to Tony Blair might as well have been an anti stood up, I would say. So you need to remember they are very different than us. Ooh, that's a naughty thing to say, but it's true. Do you think? Take a break? Well, look, we can have another question or two before I do the next one. We want to keep it moving.
You said it before about propaganda. We've only been awake a few years since we moved down here. But you grow up watching films on TV and shows that the West are good. CIA
I know.
is good, Britain is good, Australia is good.
Yeah.
And it is, you know, North Korea, Russia, China are bad. Everyone's bad. Everyone's good. There's good and bad everything. It's taken a long time for this. COVID has helped us come awake. Because by threatening to shut us down, it's actually been a good thing as well as a bad thing.
Exactly. And if we can get more of that and keep growing it, that is our hope for the future. And who said the line between good and evil cuts through every person's heart? Solzhenitsyn. We're all good and evil. Now, in fairness, some of us are overwhelmingly good with a teeny bit of evil, and some of us are like Tony Blair. But everyone has both, and every country has both, and every culture has both. And if it goes the wrong way and their leaders take them the wrong way, they become an evil mob, you know. And if they are able to get decent enough leaders and stay out of bad things, then you can get a nice country, which we all hope for.
Yeah, I was just thinking with evil bosses, the thing that they seem to struggle with is discerning, you know, who they can trust. So when you're talking about game playing, you know, like Trump playing a bit, you know, all these leaders, it's almost like that's what decent people have the ability to do, to sort of know what they're doing, and they know who they can trust, whereas an evil person has problems, I think, trusting anyone, in my experience. Is that what you think? Or?
Yeah, an evil person, there's a famous quote, oddly enough, and I forget who it is, but a big name. And he said something like, and I saved it somewhere, he said something like, the problem with, I think he said evil people, is they are always willing to work together. And that's what gives them power.
Is it the Swarm by Shiva?
Could be. Oh, I interviewed him once. That guy is interesting. He's a toughie. But no, the famous quote was, and I did resonate because whatever about them trusting people, and they probably don't trust each other, but they will work together. In Ireland there's a phrase, at Neon Kiro Ella. One beetle recognises another beetle. One bad person recognises another. And it shows two beetles tipping their hats in the cartoon. So bad people tend to find each other and tend to work together towards bad or greedy or nasty goals. They tend to align. Now, they might betray each other, but good people tend to be fragmented. Good people are just, you know, not trying to align with good people to do good things. They're just busy with their lives. But evil people tend to align with other evil people that they know will move with them towards, we're all going to get money and power. You know, by its nature, there's a tendency for them to coalesce. What we hope for, actually, is to set up any scenario which will divide and conquer them. And sometimes it happens where something goes wrong and then they scapegoat another evil guy, or they whistle blow on one bad guy tells on another, and then suddenly you're going, yes, I love it. But yeah, they don't trust. But they do make allegiances and alliances, whereas the good
people do as well.
They do very much so. But I think the bad people tend to come together, and they tend to come together with people with money, because a lot of people who get up and get super rich, they're not exactly the nicest people. And then money and badness can combine together, and they're all covering each other, and you know, like mafia. Whereas good people do, of course, work together, but we tend not to. We don't like. If you look at all the good people with COVID, we had one clear, overwhelming threat, which is these guys, and we kind of knew it. But we didn't all go into lockstep together, right, and cover for each other. There was a huge amount of infighting. I mean, Malone is saying that he's wrong, and this guy says, I was the first, you know, to discover. There's a lot of fractious behaviour in the resistance movement.
Ego.
And ego came in. Whereas the bad guys will tend to put aside the ego, because they want the money, they want the power, and they put aside the ego.
Well, they know the other bad person's bad, they're bad.
Yeah.
People are a bit more naive and more trusted. If you're bad, you know that person is bad.
Oh, that's another advantage.
And you're aware of it, so you then.
And you're watching them.
Yeah.
Whereas the good person is taken in by the bad person because of naivety. Naivety is a big problem too. Look, that is very complex, that whole thing. But generally, the bad people tend not to trust each other. The good people have some advantages by being good, and the truth will always win. But the bad people also have a bit of an edge because they will work together towards badness. Damn them. Okay, you got a cup of tea. Yes? One last.
Yeah, good people have a conscience.
Yes, that is powerful, but the only thing is, they are also, bad people have a slight edge because they don't have to worry about a conscience, they don't have to worry about hurting people, they don't have to worry about anything but their own greed and need for power. So they're singular and focused. And that's not to say, they'll beat us. Good people, one last thing, in my psychology, and I might mention it in the next talk, the power of values and principles is huge. And the example I give my online class people is, think of the martyrs, burned alive at the stake, and in often cases didn't even cry out. That's a superpower. How could you go and be burnt on the stake and not cry out? Superpower. Well, that's a belief and a principle that allows them to do that. So that's the power of good people. Values and principles that will allow you to have courage and stand up. That is our power. Whereas the bad people don't really have that at all. They've just got greed and lust. So yeah, in fairness, good people have powerful advantages, but having a conscience and trying to be nice, sometimes you can just be taken in. And by God, we've been taken in a lot in this stuff. Okay then, thank you.